Okay, so now we're going to talk about natural disruptions to ecosystems. So, this is any type of natural event that disrupts the structure or function of an ecosystem, and it is not anthropogenic, so it is not man made or caused by humans. Examples of this would be tornadoes, hurricanes, asteroids, forest fires, drought, um, flooding after torrential rain, things like that. Natural disturbances can be even greater because hurricanes are one of the most powerful natural disasters on Earth. These can be even greater than human disruptions and cause a lot more damage. These can occur either periodically or seasonally or episodically or randomly. And so seasonal just occurs with a regular frequency, like every summer a drought is going to happen, or every winter we're going to have snowstorms. Okay, so there's examples would be like dry, wet seasons that we might see on the plains or in Africa. I usually tend to think of that with Africa. Episodic are just occasional events that really don't have a regular frequency. So even though they might have a season, they're not like definitely going to happen. So for instance, a hurricane or a drought or a forest fire would be an example of an episodic event. We even then have random events that just happen. An earthquake, an asteroid, a volcano erupts. These things aren't periodic, they're not seasonal. They just happen at any point. So it's very random as to when those will happen. Okay, ecosystems, because of disturbances, need to be both resistant and resilient. And it's important that you know those two terms. So, resistance is a measurement of how much an ecosystem changes after a disruption. After a disturbance, there's very little, if there is very little change after a disturbance, then the ecosystem is considered to be quite resistant. So, high resistance usually equals a very stable, biodiverse ecosystem. Resilience, on the other hand, is how quickly the ecosystem returns back to its normal, healthy, stable state after a disturbance. And again, ecosystems that are highly diverse, are stable, tend to have a high resiliency. They can bounce back after some sort of a natural or even potentially man made disturbance. So, some different examples of natural disturbances include natural climate change. So, we've all heard that climate change has happened over geologic time for many, many reasons. This just occurs because of slight changes in the Earth's orbit and tilt, which has caused many ice ages, warmer periods where the Earth shifts slightly closer to or further from the sun. And this all happens very normally. The difference, though, is that this is generally what, and these are years before present day, so 800,000 to zero to the current time. This happens on a very, like, almost episodic, you could say, not episodic, but seasonal or periodic way, where it definitely happens. But then if you look at the level of CO2 in 2014, we can see that this current climate change that we're in right now far exceeds, it more than doubles the natural climate change that's happened over 800,000 years that we have ice core records for. Anyway, so natural climate change, just an example of a natural disturbance. However, we have to realize and understand that at this point we're in what we call anthropogenic or um, man-made climate change. Okay. So sea level has also varied over geologic time as glacial ice on Earth melts and forms. So during ice ages, we might get more global or glacial ice, ocean ice that occurs, and then during warming periods, we might get less. And so we can see that when we look at the different levels of these cores, and you can see that on the chart here. Okay. All right, environmental change or habitat disruption. These are major environmental disturbances that result in widespread habitat change and or loss due to these changing climates. So with climate change, we get rising sea levels, those flood coastal and estuary habitats. And so in just the normal stage of things, we've had coastal flooding in the past. However, it's at a much greater level, so we're seeing it more and more frequently at this point. So here's our current situation. This is the future prediction. And so you can see how the flooding just moves further in and more things become underwater. Migration is something else that's caused because of natural disruptions. So any wildlife may migrate to a new habitat as the result of natural disruptions. And this is one thing they're seeing with nesting birds, especially those that are on the ground underneath like windmills, although that's not a natural disturbance, but it's an example of anthropogenic disturbance. But that just shows you that migration can actually change, and the birds can, or organisms in general, can move to different areas based on coastal flooding, wildfires, all these different disturbances. So these are all impacts of natural disturbances. Okay, so here's another example of wildebeest migrating to follow rain patterns. So as rain patterns are shifting, then the wildebeest migrations are going to change as well. And so ocean species, we've actually documented ocean species moving further north as water temperature warms. Bird migrations and breeding is shifting earlier as insect hatchlings start to appear earlier and earlier and earlier in the year. It used to be maybe birds would migrate middle of May. Now we're seeing bird migrations happening much, much sooner than that. And you can see that here. Let me get rid of my picture for a second. By looking at 1980 versus today, and how it used to be the caterpillars were released here. Now they're hatching here. And so that's shifting what has to happen with the frequency of breeding. And so that's it for 2.5 with natural disturbances. Just realize what natural disturbances are, how they're different than anthropogenic disturbances, and some of the effects of those disturbances. So for this practice FRQ, you're going to describe the relationship between latitude and change in first leaf date depicted in the graph, and explain why you think this relationship exists. So we're looking at when we see the first leaves appear in the spring, and why do we think we are seeing a change? Okay. If you have any questions, make sure you talk to me in class. Have a good day.